The air in the courtroom tasted like old paper and hushed dread. My hands were slick, tracing the worn grain of the polished wood in front of me. He sat across the aisle, the man I had loved, polished and calm, beside his lawyer.
He wouldn't look at me.
He hadn't looked at me, not really, in months. Not since the day the world fractured. It started, I suppose, like all endings do, subtly, a shift in the light you barely notice until the room is plunged into shadow. Life felt solid. My life. A house that held the echo of shared laughter, a garden blooming under my care, and a strongbox tucked away in the master closet. Inside that box wasn't just metal and stone. It was history. My grandmother's pearls, creamy and cool against the skin, worn on my wedding day. The sapphire pendant my mother gave me for my 30th birthday, a deep ocean blue that seemed to absorb light. Diamond earrings, small but fiercely bright, a gift from him on our 10th anniversary, a promise of forever. These weren't just things. They were chapters of a life, bound in gold and silver. They were the quiet keepers of memory, holding the weight of generations, of love given and received. They were mine. Unquestionably mine. And then the silence. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a creeping emptiness, like a room being slowly, meticulously stripped bare while you sleep. I noticed it first as a small disquiet, a feeling something was off, like a tune you couldn't quite place but knew was wrong. He was distant. Physically present, yes, sitting across the dinner table, occupying his side of the bed, but a million miles away. His eyes held a restless light, a nervous energy that hummed just beneath the surface of his forced composure. Late nights at the office became the norm. Business trips stretched longer. His phone was a constant, secretive companion, clutched tight, face down on surfaces. The easy intimacy we'd shared curdled into a polite, tense cohabitation. The air in the house grew thin, brittle. One wrong word, one misplaced glance, felt like it could shatter everything. I tried to talk. I tried to reach across the growing chasm. "Is everything okay?" I'd ask, my voice small in the cavernous silence that had become our home. He'd nod, maybe grunt, offer a vague platitude about stress, about work, about the pressures of his world that I, apparently, couldn't possibly understand. A wall rose between us, smooth and unbreachable, built of his evasions and my growing unease. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, my own intuition screaming while he smiled that tight, unconvincing smile. The man I knew was receding, replaced by a stranger with familiar eyes. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. The morning I found the box empty began like any other. Sun slanted through the bedroom window, painting stripes across the rug. I was getting ready for a rare evening out with friends, a small attempt to claw back some semblance of my own life from the suffocating atmosphere of our marriage. I needed the sapphire pendant. It matched the dress. I went to the closet, reached for the familiar heavy little safe box tucked on the top shelf, behind the winter blankets. It was still there. My fingers closed around the cool metal, but as I lifted it, it felt light.
Wrong.
My heart gave a frantic little leap. I told myself I was being silly. Maybe I'd taken something out recently and forgotten. Maybe it was just my imagination. I carried it to the bed, set it down, my hands trembling slightly. The combination, a date significant only to us. My fingers fumbled slightly on the dial.
Click.
The latch released. I lifted the lid. Empty. Not just the pendant. Everything. The pearls, the earrings, the ruby ring from my grandmother, a tiny, intricate gold locket holding a miniature photo of my parents.
Gone.
The velvet lining stared back at me, a silent, dark maw of absence. My breath hitched. A cold dread began to spread through my chest, icy tendrils reaching into my stomach. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking slightly. He was usually gone by now, but sometimes he worked from his home office. No answer. The silence of the house seemed to amplify the frantic pounding of my own heart. I searched, frantically, tearing the closet apart, pulling out drawers, looking under the bed, anywhere, stupidly, ridiculously, hoping I had just misplaced the entire box, or perhaps taken everything out in some fugue state. But I knew, deep down, in the pit of my stomach, a cold, hard certainty was forming. This wasn't misplacement. This was removal. Deliberate. Complete. When he came home that night, late as usual, the carefully constructed calm I'd tried to build shattered the moment he walked through the door. His tie was loose, his collar slightly askew. He looked tired, but there was that restless energy again, like a humming wire. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the empty box on the table between us like a silent accusation. He stopped, mid-step, his hand still on the doorknob. His eyes, when they finally met mine, were blank. "Where's what?" "My jewelry. The box from the closet. It's empty." His face didn't crumple. It didn't show shock or surprise. It tightened, a mask slamming into place. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. He closed the door slowly, deliberately. The click of the lock echoed in the sudden, suffocating stillness. "Ah," he said, his voice unnaturally level. That. As if it were a trivial thing. A missing set of keys. A forgotten grocery item. My history. My inheritance. The tangible symbols of my life. That. I repeated, the whisper hardening into a brittle shard of sound. "You took it." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, cold and unavoidable. He didn't deny it. He didn't look away this time. He walked further into the room, loosened his tie completely, draped it over the back of a chair. He moved with a strange, detached casualness that was more horrifying than any confession. "I needed to," he said, finally, sitting down, leaning back, as if discussing the weather. "Needed to." The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. "Needed to." My voice rose, cracking. "Needed to steal my property? My family heirlooms." He sighed, a weary, put-upon sound. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just jewelry." Just jewelry. The words hit me like a physical blow. Just jewelry. The pearls my grandmother wore when she fled a war-torn country. The sapphire my mother saved for years to buy. Just jewelry. "What did you do with it?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I barely recognized. He hesitated, looked away. "I sold it." "Sold it." The world tilted. He had taken the most precious, irreplaceable things I owned and reduced them to a transaction. To cash. My mind reeled. Why? Why would he do this? Was he in trouble? Gambling debts? Business failing? A million frantic possibilities clawed at my brain. "Why?" I whispered, the question raw, torn from my throat. He finally looked back at me, and in his eyes, I saw not desperation, not fear, but something far colder, something that froze my blood. A kind of arrogant justification. "I invested it," he said, "in a business." A business. Relief warred with confusion. Okay, maybe a bad investment, a desperate measure. But why mine? Why without asking? Why lie about it? Then the name. He said the name. Casually. Like it was just another detail. The name of the woman I had suspected, the one who called at odd hours, the one whose name came up in hushed tones from his colleagues. The one he had denied, calmly and repeatedly, was anything more than a friend, a business acquaintance. Whose business? I asked, though I already knew. The pit in my stomach deepened, a black hole expanding, consuming everything. He said her name again. "Let's call her Sarah." "Sarah's," he said. "She's starting a boutique. Needed seed money. I wanted to help her get on her feet." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of my own heart breaking into a million irreparable pieces. He hadn't stolen from me out of desperation. He had stolen from me out of love, affection, a desire to build a future with someone else, using the foundations of my past, my memories, my history. He had literally sold my legacy to fund hers. It wasn't just the jewelry. It was the ultimate betrayal. He hadn't just been having an affair. He had been planning a future, a life, a new beginning with another woman, and he had financed it with the most deeply personal, irreplaceable things I owned. He had taken the symbols of our life together, the treasures I held most dear, and cashed them in to buy a new life with her. The shock was so profound, it was almost physical. My body felt numb, detached. I stared at him, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my protector, the one person in the world I could trust implicitly. And he had done this. So calmly. So practically. He spoke about funding a business, about investments, about helping Sarah, as if my jewelry was just a pile of abstract assets, not heirlooms steeped in memory and love. The initial shock gave way to a cold, biting fury. Not a hot, explosive rage, but something deeper, more dangerous. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From the sheer force of the betrayal.
You took my
jewelry, I articulated slowly, each word heavy with accusation, to buy your mistress a business. He flinched then, just slightly. The casual mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Defensiveness?
guilt, pity.
No, not pity. Never pity. It wasn't like that, he began, the familiar path of lies and justifications opening up before him. Wasn't like what? I cut him off, my voice gaining strength, a dangerous edge. Wasn't like you stole from your wife to set up the woman you're sleeping with. It's complicated, he said, falling back on the oldest, lamest excuse in the book. Complicated? I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that didn't hold an ounce of humor. There's nothing complicated about theft and betrayal. It's actually quite simple. He stood up then, as if to retreat, to escape the conversation. The conversation he had forced by his actions. I'll pay you back, he said, as if that would fix anything. As if money could replace my grandmother's pearls. You can't, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You can't pay back history. You can't pay back trust. You certainly can't pay back what you did. He left that night, walked out the door, and didn't come back. Didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note. Just walked out, leaving me alone in the shell of our home, with the empty box and the ruins of my life scattered around me. The days that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. The house felt haunted, every corner echoing with his absence, with the ghost of the man I thought I knew. I called friends, my voice trembling as I tried to explain, the words catching in my throat. Their shock mirrored my own. How could he? How could the man they knew, the kind, successful, charming man, do something so cruel, so calculating? My family was outraged. My father, usually a quiet, reserved man, was white with fury. My mother cried, heartbroken not just for me, but for the desecration of the things she had passed down, the memories attached to them. But the tears eventually dried. The shock wore off, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was angry, and I was determined. He had taken from me, not just physically, but emotionally, historically. He had tried to erase my past to build his future. I wouldn't let him. The first step was obvious, terrifying, and necessary. A lawyer. Sitting in the lawyer's office felt alien. The air was cool, professional. Stacks of files lined the shelves, containing the fractured lives of strangers. Mine was about to join them. I told my story, my voice flat, numb, recounting the discovery of the empty box, his confession, the name Sarah, the boutique. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with a calm demeanor, listened intently, taking notes. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, her pen poised over her notepad. This is more than just a divorce, you understand, she said, her voice low. This is theft. Grand larceny, potentially, depending on the value of the jewelry. And using stolen property to fund a business. That complicates things significantly. Not just legally, but in terms of building a case. A case? I asked, confused. I just wanted a divorce. I just wanted out. To recover your property, she said. And to ensure he faces consequences for his actions. Consequences. The word resonated. He shouldn't get away with this. He shouldn't get to build his new life on the ashes of mine, funded by what he stole.
How?
I asked. He sold it. He said he sold it. That's what he says, she replied, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. But jewelry of that value, especially heirlooms, they aren't just melted down and gone forever. There's a trail. A paper trail, yes, from the sale. But sometimes they are resold, kept by collectors. If we can prove it was stolen, and we can trace it, there's a possibility, however small, of recovery. Recovery. The word hung in the air, shimmering with impossible hope. Getting the jewelry back. Not just a monetary value, an insurance check, but the physical objects themselves. The pearls, the sapphire. It felt like grasping at smoke. But the idea took root. The early days of the legal process were slow, frustrating, and demoralizing. Papers were filed. My husband, through his lawyer, responded with a carefully worded denial of malicious intent, framing the jewelry sale as a necessary loan from marital assets for a joint investment opportunity that went awry. His lawyer painted a picture of a dedicated businessman making difficult choices, spinning the narrative to minimize his actions. They tried to frame it as simply part of the marital estate to be divided, arguing the specific items were irrelevant. Only their cash value mattered. I felt like I was drowning in bureaucracy, in legalese, in his carefully constructed lies. Every piece of paper, every negotiation through lawyers, felt like a fresh wave of betrayal. He wasn't just stealing my things. He was trying to steal my truth, warp the narrative, make me seem like a hysterical woman overreacting to a financial decision. Meanwhile, whispers reached me. Sarah's boutique was opening. A grand opening, funded, I knew, by my pearls and my sapphire. The thought was like a physical pain in my chest. My loss, her gain. My tears, her celebration. It fueled the cold anger that was quickly becoming my dominant emotion. My lawyer worked tirelessly. We gathered evidence. Not just financial records which he tried to obscure, but smaller things. Timelines of his affair, corroborated by friends who had seen them together, hotel receipts, phone records showing calls to Sarah at all hours. And we focused on the jewelry itself. Appraisals, detailed descriptions, photos. My lawyer hired a private investigator to start quietly looking into where high-value jewelry was sold in the area around the time mine disappeared. It felt like a long shot. A desperate gamble. The rising challenges were relentless. His lawyers fought back hard. They questioned my memory, the exact value of the pieces, claiming I was inflating their worth. They painted me as vindictive, seeking to punish him unfairly. The financial strain of the legal battle began to weigh on me. He had control of most of our joint funds, and he made accessing them difficult. I had to rely on my own savings I had intended for our future, now spent on fighting him for my past. Doubt began to creep in. Was this worth it? The emotional toll was immense. Sleepless nights, days spent with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Every time I saw something about Sarah's successful boutique online, a fresh wave of nausea would wash over me. They were building their dream on my ruins. Maybe I should just cut my losses, settle for a financial judgment, try to move on. But then I would look at the empty space in my closet where the box used to be. I would remember the feel of the pearls against my skin, the glint of the sapphire. They weren't just money. They were me. Giving up the fight felt like giving away another piece of myself to him, to them. The midpoint shift came subtly, a slow dawning realization. This wasn't just about money or even just about justice in the abstract sense. It was about reclaiming what was taken. It was about the principle. He had treated me and my property with utter contempt. He thought he was clever, untraceable, reducing irreplaceable heirlooms to a fungible asset he could dispose of for his own gain. He thought he could get away with it. My lawyer, sensing my wavering resolve, sat me down. He thinks he's safe, she said, her voice calm but firm. He thinks once the jewelry was sold, it's just a financial calculation.
But what he did was theft.
Using stolen property to fund a business adds another layer. We have grounds to pursue not just a divorce settlement, but a civil claim for the recovery of stolen goods and potentially involve law enforcement if we can prove criminal intent and trace the items. Trace the items. That was the key. The private investigator had some leads, tentative whispers from jewelry dealers about specific pieces matching the descriptions. One lead, in particular, seemed promising. A collector known for acquiring unique pieces who might not have known the provenance of the jewelry when he bought it. It was a long shot, a delicate dance involving discretion and legal maneuvering. My lawyer explained the strategy. We would pursue the divorce, yes, as the primary legal framework. But quietly, separately, we would continue to build the case for theft and recovery. If we could find the jewelry, prove it was mine, and prove he sold it under false pretenses, which his actions implied, we could petition the court for its return. It wasn't just about adding the monetary value to the divorce settlement. It was about the physical recovery. This was the pivot. The focus shifted from simply ending the marriage and dividing assets to exposing his crime and reclaiming what was uniquely mine. The deepening crisis arrived with the full force of the legal system. Discovery began. Financial records were subpoenaed. His attempts to hide assets, to minimize his income, became clearer. His lifestyle with Sarah was evident in the spending. It felt like they were flaunting their new life, the life bought with my things. I felt increasingly isolated, the legal process cold and impersonal, stripping bare the most intimate details of my life for scrutiny. Then came the deposition. Sitting across from him, in a sterile conference room, with lawyers present. He was cool, evasive, answering questions about the jewelry sale with carefully rehearsed phrases. He admitted selling it, reiterated it was a loan, denied it was specifically for Sarah's business, a blatant lie, easily disproven with other evidence we were gathering, and maintained it was merely marital property he utilized. He seemed confident, almost smug, believing he had covered his tracks sufficiently. Looking at him, hearing his calm lies, my blood ran cold. He had no remorse. Only self-preservation. Sarah was deposed too. She was nervous, defensive. She confirmed the money from him, confirmed it funded her business. She denied knowing where the money came from, claiming he told her it was an investment from his personal funds. Her story was flimsy, full of convenient blanks. But it was clear she was benefiting directly from his theft. The legal costs mounted. I had to sell some smaller assets of my own to keep funding the fight. There were days I felt utterly exhausted, defeated. Was this battle worth the cost, the pain, the stress? My lawyer remained steadfast. We have a strong case for theft, she insisted. His story doesn't hold up. The evidence is mounting. The most difficult part was the waiting. Waiting for legal responses, waiting for the investigators' reports, waiting for court dates. Time seemed to stretch and warp. My life felt on hold, consumed by the legal process, by the shadow of his betrayal. The house felt even colder, the silence heavier. But the quiet investigation into the jewelry continued. The private investigator, persistent and discreet, followed the leads. He contacted dealers, collectors, using the detailed descriptions and photos I had provided. It was a long, tedious search, a needle in a haystack. Then a breakthrough. A significant piece, matching the description of my sapphire pendant, had surfaced recently in a private sale. The timing was right. The seller was a reputable dealer, but the source was described only as a private individual who had been discreet about the origin. It was a lead, a fragile thread. My lawyer acted swiftly and quietly. Using the evidence we had built of his theft, coupled with the new information about the specific item, she filed a separate motion with the court, not just for asset division, but specifically for the recovery of stolen property. This required a different legal burden of proof, focusing on the act of theft itself, not just the value of the marital estate. The court reviewed the evidence presented in the motion, his admission of taking and selling the jewelry, the timeline connecting the sale to the funding of Sarah's business, the evidence of his affair and intent to build a separate life, and now, the potential tracing of a specific piece back to a recent transaction. It was enough to convince a judge that there was probable cause to believe theft had occurred and that the property might be recoverable. A court order was issued. It wasn't a public spectacle, not yet. It was quiet, targeted. It authorized law enforcement, specifically the Financial Crimes Unit, who now saw the potential for fraud and theft, to investigate and, if the item was located and verified, to secure it as evidence related to a potential crime. The private investigator, working closely with law enforcement under the court order, finally located the sapphire pendant. It was with a collector who, when presented with the evidence of its likely stolen provenance and the court order, cooperated fully. He had purchased it in good faith, but understood the legal ramifications. The pendant, my mother's sapphire, was secured by the police. This was the turning point, the moment the passive waiting ended and the active reclamation began. It wasn't just a legal tactic, it was a shift in power. He thought he had converted the irreplaceable into anonymous cash, dissolving my history into the vast pool of financial transactions. He was wrong. My history had a form, a shape, and the law was now recognizing its right to be returned. The legal proceedings moved towards a final hearing, a day set to finalize the divorce and rule on the distribution of assets. His lawyers continued to push for a simple financial settlement, arguing over valuations, trying to minimize the impact of his affair and the jewelry sale, framing it as a mere division of marital property. They seemed confident, believing the worst I could do was get a bigger share of the remaining money. They had no idea about the quiet investigation, the court order, the recovered pendant. My lawyer, and I kept it close, a strategic silence. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was imposing, formal. The judge sat elevated, a figure of stern authority. Lawyers bustled with papers. Spectators, mostly other parties waiting for their cases, filled the benches. He sat across from me, looking confident, even a little arrogant. Sarah wasn't there, but I knew he was thinking of her, of their future. The proceedings began. Lawyers made their opening statements. His lawyer presented their case. The marriage had irretrievably broken down. The assets should be divided fairly, downplaying the circumstances of the jewelry's sale as a business decision. My lawyer presented our case. The marriage ended due to his adultery and theft, and the assets should reflect not just the financial contributions, but the emotional and historical value destroyed by his actions. She also mentioned, calmly and precisely, the matter of stolen property used to fund an outside business, hinting at evidence that would be presented. He shifted slightly in his seat, a flicker of unease. He hadn't expected her to lead with the theft. He expected the focus to be on the affair and asset division. Witnesses were called. I testified, recounting the discovery of the empty box, his confession, the name Sarah, the business. My voice was steady, factual, devoid of overt emotion, which somehow made the story more powerful. His lawyer cross-examined me, trying to trip me up, to make me seem unreliable or overly emotional. I answered truthfully, calmly. Then his turn came. He testified, smooth and practiced, sticking to his narrative of a necessary business decision. His lawyer led him through his version of events, highlighting his professional successes, portraying him as a victim of a difficult marriage and an unfair accusation. He looked directly at the judge, avoiding my gaze, radiating a manufactured sincerity. My lawyer began her cross-examination. She was methodical, sharp. She took him through his testimony, point by point, exposing the inconsistencies. She presented evidence of his affair, the timeline, his financial transactions related to Sarah's business. His composure began to crack around the edges. He fidgeted, his answers becoming more defensive, less polished. Then she turned to the jewelry. "Mr. Husband's last name," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the courtroom air. "You testified that you sold your wife's jewelry as part of a business investment. Is that correct?" "Yes," he said, his voice steady, regaining some of his confidence. "It was a necessary measure. Marital property. And you received cash for this jewelry?" "Yes." "And what did you do with that cash?" He hesitated. "As I said, I invested it." Specifically, my lawyer pressed, did a significant portion of that money go towards funding the opening of a retail boutique owned by Ms. Sarah's last name? His lawyer objected, claiming relevance. The judge overruled it. He shifted, uncomfortable. I provided some funds to Ms. Sarah's last name, he admitted, reluctantly. As a personal loan. A loan you facilitated by selling your wife's personal, irreplaceable heirlooms, my lawyer asked, her voice rising slightly. They were assets, he insisted, his jaw tight. Marital assets. They were gifts, my lawyer countered, showing receipts, old photos, my sworn testimony. Given to her specifically. Appraised in her name. Cherished family heirlooms. Not abstract assets to be liquidated for your personal gain, especially not to fund the life you were building with another woman. He bristled. His lawyer objected again, louder this time. The courtroom atmosphere tightened, everyone sensing the shift, the building tension. My lawyer paused, a deliberate, dramatic silence falling over the room. She looked at the judge, then back at my husband, a faint, cold smile touching her lips. This was it. The plot twist. Your Honor, she addressed the judge, her voice calm and clear. We have presented evidence that Mr. Husband's last name committed theft by taking and selling his wife's personal property without her knowledge or consent. We have also presented evidence that the proceeds of this theft were used to fund a specific business venture unrelated to the marital estate. She paused again, looking at my husband. His smug expression had completely vanished, replaced by a look of bewilderment, even fear. He didn't understand where this was going. He thought this was just about arguing over money. Furthermore, Your Honor, my lawyer continued, her voice gaining weight, based on evidence presented to the court in a separate motion, evidence proving the provenance of the stolen goods and their subsequent transaction trail, we have been working with local law enforcement under court order. My husband's eyes widened slightly. Law enforcement? What was she talking about? As a result of that investigation, Your Honor, my lawyer stated, her voice ringing with quiet authority, the primary stolen item, the sapphire pendant belonging to my client, Mrs. My last name, has been located and recovered. A ripple went through the courtroom. People shifted, whispering. My husband froze, his face pale. Recovered?
How?
He had sold it. It was gone. He thought it was gone forever, just a line item on a balance sheet. We have the item here today, Your Honor, my lawyer announced, turning towards the back of the courtroom. And then, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Two figures walked in, solemn and official, a uniformed police officer and a representative from the sheriff's department, holding a padded, secure evidence box. They walked slowly towards the judge's bench. Every eye in the room followed them. My husband watched them, his face contorted in disbelief. The officer approached the judge, presented the box, and then, with the judge's permission, opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark foam, was the sapphire pendant. It caught the fluorescent light of the courtroom, the deep blue stone gleaming, unmistakable. The officer then walked towards my lawyer's table, where I sat. He presented the open box to me. I looked down at it. My sapphire. My mother's sapphire. Cold, impossibly real. It felt surreal, like a dream. It was here. Back. My husband had half risen from his seat, his eyes fixed on the pendant, his face slack with shock. He looked utterly blindsided. His scheme, his calculated betrayal, had been exposed in the most visceral way possible. It wasn't just paper trails and financial records anymore. It was the physical evidence, returned undeniable, sitting there in the courtroom for everyone to see. This, Your Honor, my lawyer said, her voice steady, pointing to the pendant, is the item Mr. Husband's last name stole from his wife to fund his mistress's business. The air seemed to rush out of the room. A collective gasp, a ripple of murmurs. The weight of the moment was immense. He hadn't just lied. He had stolen. And the stolen goods were here, tangible proof of his crime, laid bare in the formal setting of the court. The color drained from his face entirely. His eyes rolled back slightly. He swayed, clutching at the edge of the table. And then he collapsed. Not dramatically, like in the movies, but a sudden, boneless slump. He crumpled to the floor beside his chair, a heap of expensive suit and shattered composure. His lawyer, startled, lunged forward, calling his name. The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos. Bailiffs moved quickly. A call for medical assistance went out. The judge, maintaining composure, ordered a brief recess. I sat there, the open box with the sapphire pendant still before me, watching the scene unfold. There was no triumph in me.
No joy.
Just a profound, cold emptiness. This was the man I had married, reduced to this. His carefully constructed world, his lies, his arrogance, collapsing under the weight of a single, blue stone. It wasn't just the collapse that blindsided him. It was the method of recovery. He expected a fight over money, a negotiation over assets. He never anticipated that I, with my quiet lawyer and a persistent investigator, would pursue the theft itself, weaponizing the law to reclaim the physical objects. He thought the jewelry was gone forever, converted into untraceable cash, just another part of the marital pie. He didn't account for the possibility of the system recognizing the unique nature of stolen heirlooms and aiding in their recovery. He didn't account for the power of truth, made manifest in the return of the physical evidence. He was so focused on the financial gain and covering his tracks that he completely underestimated the emotional and legal significance of the items themselves. He thought he was divorcing a wife. He forgot he had stolen from a woman who had nothing left to lose but her dignity and her history. And I had just taken back a piece of both. The courtroom was a flurry of activity around his prostrate form. His lawyer was frantic. The bailiffs were professional, efficient. I watched, detached, holding the weight of the sapphire in my gaze. The judge called the recess. My lawyer gently closed the box containing the pendant. "It's safe now," she murmured. Safe. The word felt foreign. Nothing felt safe anymore. During the recess, he was attended to by paramedics, eventually conscious but clearly shaken, humiliated, his face ashen. The proceedings were adjourned for the day, postponed to allow him to recover and for the legal teams to process what had just happened. Walking out of the courthouse felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. The sunlight was too bright, the sounds of the city too loud. I carried the evidence box with the pendant inside, a physical manifestation of the day's drama. The aftermath was complex, messy, and not the neat package of justice you see in movies. His legal position was severely weakened. The theft was now a documented fact before the court, backed by physical evidence. The narrative he and his lawyer had built crumbled. The judge was clearly unimpressed, perhaps even angered, by his actions and attempted deception. The subsequent legal steps were swift. Facing potential criminal charges for grand larceny and fraud, and the certain dismantling of his assets in the divorce, including those he had tried to hide or divert to Sarah's business, he and his lawyer pursued a settlement. It was a punishing one for him. Not only did he lose significant assets, but the settlement also stipulated that he would have no claim on the jewelry, acknowledging it as my separate property that was stolen. There were also financial penalties. Sarah's business, tainted by its origins and perhaps facing scrutiny itself, reportedly struggled and eventually closed. Their relationship, built on lies and theft, didn't survive the exposure. He avoided criminal prosecution by agreeing to the harsh civil settlement, a common outcome in such cases where restitution is made, albeit under duress. But his reputation was ruined. The story, though not a public scandal in the tabloids, circulated within their professional and social circles. The man who stole from his wife to fund his mistress was exposed. I got the jewelry back. Not immediately after that day in court. There were still legal formalities, proof of ownership chains, official handovers from the police. But eventually they were returned to me. The pearls, the earrings, the ruby ring, the locket, and the sapphire pendant. Holding them again was strange. They were the same objects, yet they felt different. The history they held was now intertwined with the trauma, the betrayal, the fight. The pearls felt heavier, weighted with sadness. The sapphire's blue seemed deeper, but maybe that was just my eyes seeing the depth of the pain it had witnessed. I put them back in the safe box. the same box. But it didn't feel like a simple return to normal. Normal was gone. Irrevocably. The resolution wasn't a triumphant dance or a feeling of pure victory. It was quieter. A cold satisfaction. Yes, at seeing his smug confidence shatter. At reclaiming what was mine. But it was also tinged with a profound sadness for the wasted years, for the man I thought I knew, for the future that would never be. Rebuilding felt like starting from scratch in a familiar, yet foreign place. The house still held memories, but now they were layered with the echoes of his deceit and the battle that had taken place within its walls and beyond. I decided to sell the house. Too many ghosts. Too many reminders. I moved to a new city, a clean slate. I got a new job. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a new life, piece by piece. The jewelry came with me. I didn't hide it away this time. I kept it visible, a reminder, not just of what was lost or what was stolen, but of what was reclaimed. The pearls were no longer just my grandmother's. They were also a symbol of resilience. The sapphire wasn't just my mother's gift. It was proof that even when everything is taken, you can fight to get it back. They sat on my dresser, gleaming in the morning light. Silent witnesses to a story of love, betrayal, theft, and a quiet, relentless pursuit of justice. They were no longer just heirlooms. They were armor. They were a testament to survival. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.